And welcome everyone to the Digital Ecommerce Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Dylan Lam, as well as the Digital Dylan. I'm absolutely happy to have Deacon who joined us today. If you're passionate about e-commerce, digital marketing, or operational, today you're in a treat where Deacon is going to talk about anything to optimize your operation. So as an e-commerce company, we always want to squeeze margin from shipment to Amazon FBA fee or platform fee or PayPal fee. And today is all about operation. So let's welcome Deacon. How are you, Deacon?
I'm doing awesome. Happy to be here.
Good. Deacon, would you like to give us an introduction of yourself?
Yeah, so I guess I've been in e-commerce now for about around 10 years, and I got started in that through digital marketing, like a lot of people. And so maybe around 2015 or so, I started a digital marketing agency almost accidentally. It turned out to be a skill that I was good at, and more and more people showed up, and a lot of those people happened to be in and around e-commerce. And after a few years of that, that agency was acquired by a much larger agency who ended up having a really good, strong relationship with Facebook. And so I got to learn a lot more about the platform kind of from the inside out there, spent a lot of time there. And then over the last few years, I've stepped away from just focusing just on media buying and paid traffic and more into like consulting in general. And I still work a lot with e-commerce brands. I own an e-commerce brand myself right now as well. And a lot of the time that I spend working with people is around not so much like, here's a better ad, but more like, here's how I create an environment where I can manage my team that it winds up creating better ads in the future, just because, we're running everything well. And of course that gets into lots of like finance and project management and all the stuff that goes with, trying to keep a business running and growing.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's all about talking to employee every day and all about getting stuff done. Like we have to make a balance about it in terms of optimization. This is actually the way to try to squeeze the margin from offshore employee, and also like how to make sure that we have effective output from the local employee that we have there, right? So could you tell us, like, in terms of like beginners who join the e-commerce industry right now, and people who are already selling 6 figures and 7 figures, what are the key hiring for a great team member?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what I have found over the years is most people go through kind of the same process when they're hiring somebody. And it's like this 3 stages of it here. And stage 1 is like celebration. You're like, oh, somebody took the job. I got somebody to do this thing that I didn't really want to do, or that I needed to do, or I just needed more hands. And there's just like so much excitement around that. It feels like so much progress as the business owner in that first stage of celebration. The next stage of that is confusion. And the confusion stage, you're like, maybe a month or 2 in, and you're thinking, I really thought I would have like felt more freed up, but I actually kind of feel a little bit stressed still. I'm looking over their shoulder. I don't feel less busy, and I'm confused about that. And then the last stage is the deadly stage. The last stage is what I call the compensation stage. And in the compensation stage, you're like, well, they're not doing it like quite the way that I would. They're not up to par. So let me just help them along a little bit. Let me go compensate for their underperformance by helping raise it up. And this is the stage where I find most of the people that I work with are stuck in, because you do that once, great. Now you've hired someone and you're kind of helping them do their job. You do that more than once, and you basically are doing all of the same CEO stuff like that you were doing when you were wearing all the hats. You're like helping everybody a little bit, and you're constantly just running around like helping over here, got to get this up to par. People are standing in line at your desk waiting to ask you stuff because they know that you have the magic polish for like that last mile stuff. And so those are the phases I see most people go through. And a lot of them get stuck in that compensation phase with just a lot of people who really depend on them to do their job well. Mm-hmm. When it comes to like, all right, well, how do you get out of that? My recipe involves expectations and accountability. And part 1 of that is expectations. So how can you be more clear before, and this starts ideally before you even have your first interview or before you even post the job. It's okay to go back and retrofit. That can work. But what you essentially do is you're like, all right, if this is a, Amazon PPC manager, for example, it's like, all right, the question I always ask myself is this: what does winning look like for an Amazon PPC manager? Like, what are they doing? Like, all right, they got to understand tacos and ACOS. They got to be able to set up the campaigns. Like, well, how many campaigns should they be setting up? How do they think about negative keywords? Like, what are all these things that you're like, that's what I need them to do without relying on me? And then once you've laid that out clearly, then it's about accountability. And instead of, that compensation phase, you're actually entering into a phase where you're saying, hey, this isn't actually, you're not doing what I need you to do. What's missing? Is it documentation? Is it something else? And so that accountability piece is uncomfortable, and what I find a lot of founders need to kind of learn and practice and get comfortable with. But that's the part that allows you to, when you hire somebody, they do their job, not like you don't do their job. Like, that's kind of that last piece there.
Yeah. It was quite a mess. Like, we scaled the company from just like a 5 employee to 40 employee in like 2 years time. And then that is the exact things that I'm facing as well back in the days, until I have a operational manager come in to help me solve for the problem. So I guess, like, for the audience point of view, it's like for them to know what KPI to go for each of the role is actually one of the godsend nuggets for them to understand now, because different role, different time have different KPI for sure. But then one of the challenge that we have here in e-commerce is always ever changing. Even though if you set a KPI, it's always going to change, because you might be focusing on one thing and the next thing you're going to be focusing on different things, right? And so shall we talk about, like, say we'll start from the basic role first. We go from basic role to high up role, like on the KPI side, right? And we'll see how we can change as well along the time, adopting the OKR in the same time. Like, first thing first is, do you think OKR and KPI can partner along together?
OKRs and KPIs, can they work together?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think both are important. And I have used OKRs in the past, and I use them still here and there. And sometimes I use other systems. In every system I use, KPIs are important. And so, yeah, I think they go really well, because anytime you always need like some sort of scoreboard to know how are things going. And what I always try to tell my team is this KPI is not you. It is not your worth. It is not like you, like how I feel about you. Because if you do get into that type of environment, which I kind of always think of as more of like the Wall Street environment, where it's like perform or get out, that creates this like toxic culture where people will almost like hide for KPIs. But as a business owner, like, that can kill you at our stage. Like, and so I do use KPIs all the time, but I also always try to emphasize to the team, like, these are to measure the business. And if things aren't going well, then we'll adjust how we run the business. And I try to separate KPI from the individual. And I have found that allows much healthier conversations, and it allows them to kind of approach the KPIs with, like, if it's not working, they want to go fix it and are more open to bringing that to the team and looking for help and figuring it out, rather than being like, than trying to hide it and be like, hope nobody sees this KPI, it's not good.
Yeah. How about let's start from KPI for my first hire is actually a admin, right? Like, she graduated like to become the one of the our project manager in our company. But then, what do you think? Like, say, as in when we first get started, like, we are just like 5 people, less than 5 people in the company. Like, there are most of them is going to be like admin or designer, right? So, what would you set up as a KPI for them?
Say the role again. I was a little.
Say admin. Say admin is like they do everything. They could have doing social media posting to maybe product research. Like how it's going to be quite a vague role that we're talking about right now. But then that is going to be actually higher on when they first get started, right? So how would you measure them?
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I think a lot of people these days are familiar with EOS, Entrepreneur OS, and like Gino Wickman's work, the book Traction, all those things. And one of the things he really emphasizes is everybody has a number.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of things I love about Traction. I've used that system for years. There are a lot of things that I don't love, especially in a small business. And one of them is this: like, how do you put a number on that role you described? There's not really like a KPI in the sense of like, this is a quantifiable number that I'm going to rate you on every day. Like it's hard. The way that I think about it is kind of going back to what we were just talking about a minute ago. I start every role with the question, what does winning look like? And so in this admin role, for fun here, if we just like kick this back and forth, we're like, all right, I hired an admin. They've got tasks kind of all over the place. Why are they here? How do they help me? Like, if I asked you to just name a few things of like, what does winning look like, so that at the end of the month, you're writing that paycheck and you're like, money well spent, man, that was great. What are you experiencing as a result of some things that they're doing in this example?
Right. I guess like the admin is going to be like different things like they're doing. Like sometimes you go on to do the designer tasks. Like sometimes it's going to be like so it's, yeah, again, like let's say, to be fair, when you first hire admin, you won't be inputting too much KPI because you know that they're going to be doing other things, right? So put it another way, at what point you will start using KPI? Is it like a company more than 5 people, or a company more than 10 people? Like,
well, I use them all the time. And I want to go back to this admin example just a little bit, because there are some, like, this is where you start as a business owner. It's like, you got to grow through this phase and somehow not flame out. And so we got to figure this out. What I like to think is, like, in that role, there's not a number of like, well, you got to produce this many graphics this week, because I might not even need any graphics this week. Like, you're doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So the way that I would think about it instead is, if I have an admin on my team, what does winning look like for me if they're doing all kinds of tasks? Well, one of the things is, it looks like they're organized and they have a list of tasks. And if I show up, if I give them 5 tasks and I show up 5 days from now and say, where's task number 4? I expect them to be able to say, it's right here at this phase. I either haven't started or but they're organized enough that they know everything that has been asked of them. And then they're able to kind of tell me back. The other part would be like communication. Are they proactively coming to me? And if I say, hey, here's task number 6, do they just take it on, even though in the back of their minds, they know I'm not going to get to this. Like, I have too much stuff. Or do they take it on and say, great, task number 6, help me rank this in the priority. Like, I can do this, but I have to take task number 2 out. What do you think? That's another example. It's not a KPI, but it is what winning looks like, right? It's like them accurately saying, here's what I can do this week for you. Here's what I need clarification on. And it's not just like what I think a lot of admins experience, which is like, they just suck in every task and they believe, I just have to do all this stuff. And then the person giving them the tasks on the other side is like, I don't know where all that stuff went. I don't know what's going on over there. They keep saying yes. I don't you don't know if they're too busy or what. And so to me, like, what winning looks like is a two-way street, because it's a limited resource. So it's not a KPI, but it is something that I can look at and say, what does winning look like? Well, I always know if you have too much to do or too little to do. I always know where your task priorities are. You're asking me about priorities if you're unclear. If I give you a task that's unclear, you're helping clarify it using this type of template. So not so much a KPI as like here's how we work well together. And I will hold you accountable to that. And if we don't know where things are going, or if we're dropping balls, then we have a problem that we can talk about, whether that's graphics or scheduling or something else.
So if I give you a conclusion, would that be making sure the sand and gravel and the rocks is being prioritized correctly, and that would be the admin KPI?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So in this case, the KPI is not a number, but it's really important that we're clear on it. And it is something that we can look at subjectively and say, yeah, I think we're doing that. Or no, we're not doing that at all. So it's almost like the KPI becomes a binary, like, good job, or that's not working.
Yeah. Right. I guess there's no scorecard we can do there exactly.
Right. The scorecard's missing, but
yeah. Okay. So that's a mean, right, for everyone. So second hire, like what would be the second hire? What do you think? Do you think it's designer? I think designer is probably everyone second hire.
Is this e-commerce business? Man, that's
e-commerce, yeah.
That's so tough because a lot of these things like designers, you can get these like almost all you can eat design house buffets these days. And so it's not always clear exactly what so I don't want to say here's your next hire always, because it's always a little bit different. But somebody on the team needs to know marketing. They
it's
don't.
It's not really the founder who wants to know marketing.
And they need to be equipped with a way to create marketing assets. And I think those can be either in-house of like, hey, I brought a designer on that's going to do all this stuff. If it's not that and you're outsourcing, then the skill that you need to have on your team is writing creative briefs, which is essentially just saying, all right, I need to create this type of ad and it's aimed at this avatar for this product. Here's the big idea, the message, the promise. Here's all the stuff we want to convey. Here's kind of how I want to do it. You might not have any graphic skills at all, which is fine. But that skill, that creative direction skill, it needs to exist on your team, and it's either in the founder or you need to bring in that more importantly than you need pretty images, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good say. Yeah. Well, we have project manager doing that right now, a project manager / creative director right now. But I mean, the thing is, like right now we're trying to outsource this to ChatGPT, which is one thing that we can do right now. But not everything can be outsourced to ChatGPT because some specific design that we cannot be doing. So let's say creative director, like what would be your KPI for them?
KPI for a creative director, if we're looking at like an actual number, it's usually something around volume of stuff. And this depends a lot on, frankly, how your business works. So for example, if you're using Facebook ads as a big part of it, you're going to need some sort of regular cadence of new stuff to be testing. And so you can put a creative KPI on that and say, we need like 10 ads a month or whatever the cadence is. There are other things I think that are less, that I would put a number on less, like for example, brand style guides. There's a whole like research component to this that is really important, that is harder to measure. So some of that might be just, some of that KPI might be more like process oriented. Like, are you going through our flywheel process of like research, avatar, hook, messaging, ad, test it? Like, are you using this process, or are you just what most people do, like starting at the ad and just throwing stuff at the wall? So I think that KPI is probably a combination of some level of output of creative briefs that are, quality, and just like a process thing of like, are you doing this the right way?
Right. Yeah. I guess organization as well, like is going to be part of the.
Oh, that's a great example too. Yeah. I have a friend who just joined a house of brands, and he's kind of the first main in-house creative. And he walked in and he was messaging me yesterday. He just started this week, and he's like, there's stuff like no organization, stuff's literally everywhere. And this is like, these are your brand assets. It's really important. They're paying a lot of money for these. So yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah. I mean, normally like the asset can always go with like a banner or like an influencer video or repurposed video, raw video, like those kind of structure have to be like really dissect clearly. And like our project manager is just so busy on just trying to map it to the right thing, right place. I guess that's the thing that that would contribute the creative brief manager who should be focusing on as well. Okay, so that's the creative brief or designer. That's the creative brief KPI. How about say designer? Because obviously different tasks require different time. Do you track them? Do you think that do you think that it's fair to track them on their output and or should we check on the times on the revisions, or should we track them on the quality of the output? So how would you?
Yeah, there's kind of a few different ways to to think about this, and the right way kind of depends on your scale. Like there's a big difference also between, a website type graphic and like a social media ad. And so if I kind of go like least advanced to most advanced, I do think that turnaround time is an important measurement. And you can either do that as far as like how long does it take to get something made? Like how long is it in the oven before it comes out and I get to try it? Or it can just, I tend to just measure like number of output more often. I think it's a little bit easier to just measure like completed tasks than like duration of task. I do keep a close eye on the duration of tasks because, as the marketing agency, for example, the one that I ran for a long time, it's like when you need new ads, you need new ads. And so you can't take like 2 weeks to deliver those or we're in a lot of trouble. And so I did keep a close eye on turnaround times, but not on every task. That was more of just a like subjective like asking my media buying team, like, are you getting what you need out of these? Are they coming back fast enough? How long is that taking? But I did measure quantity of stuff coming out was easier to manage in like ClickUp or Asana. Like you could create reports that are very clearly like, here's what's coming out. Right. And then the last measurement that I think is, I have two other things to think about. One of them is very subjective and it's kind of around variety. And so I do this more in the hiring process. If I'm hiring someone that I need to be able to like make ads in particular, I need a lot of different types of ads because especially in Facebook, the creative creates the audience. And so I need things that look very different and take very different approaches. And so if I have a creative brief that's, for this greens powder supplement or whatever that's for athletes, I need to be able to create creative that, targets very wildly different athletes and different levels of athlete. And so that takes a creative person who can see one creative brief and come up with completely different ideas about how to execute that. And so I also look at variety of outputs because that's really important. And then the last measurement is a little bit more complex to measure. So a lot of times in earlier stages, I think of it more as a concept rather than a specific number I can get. And that number is called percent complete and accurate. Kind of a mouthful, but what that's essentially saying is when I ask a designer for something and it comes back, how many of those, what percentage of those are like, great, that's what I needed, versus time for revisions, and like how much time how many things are you sending back, like revise this, change this, change that, because that will take your output capacity and just absolutely squash it. Exactly. And so that is I never found a good way to get like a really accurate measurement about it. Mm-hmm. It was a concept that I talked to my media buyers about a lot. And in this organization, for clarity, my media buyers were acting as like mini creative directors, and they were ordering creative from the creative team. And so every week I'm asking them, what are you thinking? Like percent complete and accurate. How's your experience getting what you need this week? Mm-hmm. And and they would be able to accurately say like, yeah, it comes back, I use it, I love it, this is going great. Or this one, like this particular designer, like it's just not hitting the mark. It's slow. I'm having to get a lot of revision requests, etc.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very interesting question that to explore that you about consent and the revision about how many times it comes back. What do you think designer should be capable of? Like, or what is their responsibility to decrease the number of revision? Because an effective designer team is actually all about revision time. So what should we empower them, and what should they be taking responsible for when it comes to the, like, between the creative brief director and himself, or media buyer himself and himself, like how many information we should give it to him and how many questions he should ask before he start the task, what do you think?
Yeah, this is really where you earn your money as the leader, because there is no cut and dried answer here. And I'm sure as I was kind of talking through that last part, you were probably thinking like, what if the creative brief sucks? Like, what if this thing, like, what if it's not their fault? Like, so I never put the blame it's like, oh, if it's percent complete and accurate is too high, it's their fault. It's never like that. For me, these are signals that give you directional information and kind of just tell you, like, there's a hot spot in the business here. You need to go figure this out. And so to figure that out, it would be, me and the creative director and the designer. Let me say this in other words, just so we're really clear about what each role is doing. For me, it would be the person asking for the creative who's saying, here's exactly what I need and what I'm hoping to get. And the person making the creative, and me, who's, at some level, they're a boss of both of them, right? It would be us three in a room looking at this going, all right, the problem is we are having to have too many revisions. And, media buyer, like, why are you, let's go through I love specific examples. I find all of the meat and potatoes and the gold, so to speak, is all in specific examples. If you don't bring specific examples, people will just be like, oh, my creative briefs aren't that good, or I didn't get what I needed, or this one's too, like, I didn't have the assets I needed. But if you take specific ones and be like, guy, okay, here's what you got back. What was wrong with this? And the media buyer explains it, and you're like, cool. All right, graphic designer, what are you hearing? Like, oh, I didn't have the assets I needed, or the creative brief wasn't clear. And through that, what you're looking for isn't like, who do I blame? It's what broke in this process. So I always try to approach things systemically from like this system didn't work for these people. And it's either the creative brief was wrong, we didn't have the right assets, expectations were wrong, or I don't know. Sometimes you find other weird stuff. But the point is, I get everybody in the room and I try to figure out where did this break down? And, over time you might find like, oh, we could actually write better creative briefs, or you know what, we're not doing a good job getting the assets from the brand to even equip the graphic designers. And so they're having to make a bunch of assumptions, and we weren't clear about, whether this was supposed to be a polished brand video or a like kind of like organic, authentic, rough video. And so a lot of that stuff, just you do that over time and your briefs will get better and your team will get better. And people are like, they want to do good at their job if you did a good job of hiring. And so putting them in these environments will help kind of just set that tone of, okay, this didn't work, but let's go figure it out. Because anytime you have an interface between departments where something's handed off, there are two people involved in why that might not have worked.
Yeah.
And a system.
Yeah.
So there's like three things to go look at.
Yeah. The system, the culture. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a culture that maybe making people wants to do better, like to do one step forward. I guess that is the ultimate one that would contribute for designer to perform some critical thinking before they ask a question or perform a task, right? Okay. How about say, we are running out of time. There's not enough to talk about when it comes to hiring. Yeah, I guess like we have to do a second part like in the future about this one. But I think like most of the audience right now, they are working with either PPC like a manager, a specialist in their in-house, or a agency, right? How about like we would just talk about the in-house Amazon PPC, like how do you set KPI for them?
Okay, so we are getting into your territory and one where, so I have a business partner who runs all of the PPC, and I'm blessed to not have to know every detail. So if this was another platform, I might have some really specific stuff. But let me talk generally about it, because I think this will still be helpful. So when it comes to something like paid traffic, it's really interesting to think about. And I think it's important to understand when you're talking about KPIs, there's two really important categories of these. There's leading indicators and lagging indicators, right? Leading indicators have two really important characteristics. Characteristic one is they are influenceable. That means like you can do something that changes the KPI. So if you're a sales guy, it's like outbound calls. Like, how many calls did you make? Well, you pick up the phone. You control if that number goes up, right? You're influencing that. So that's a one indication that's a leading indicator. The second one is also important, and this is a little bit, where you start to earn your money as the leader. The second one is predictive. It should be predictive. So if you hit, 25 outbound calls a day, does that predict that you will reach this, goal that the leading indicator is trying to aim at? And so you also need to, when you're looking for KPIs for a team, what's interesting about media buying is that most of the indicators we look at are lagging indicators. They're outcomes of the work that we did. What's your tacos and ACOS? Well, how'd you set up the campaigns? What'd you put in there? That's the result. So you do want to look at those, and that's important. But it's important to train your team. The way you affect those KPIs is by things that you do ahead of time. And as the leader, this is where I'm saying, like, I don't know PPC well enough on Amazon to say, here are the leading indicators. I get the sense that it involves things like, how many campaigns are you setting up of this type, this type, this type? How are you setting your strategies? Like all of this sort of stuff. Like, what do you do ahead of time that the end result is that tacos and ACOS that you want?
Right.
So that's how I think about it, regardless of whether it's, regardless of what channel it is. Back in Facebook days, I'm trying to remember all of the things that we measured at some level. Like I cared about number of creative tests that they were running. That was like a leading indicator. I worked with a CRO agency for a long time, and we measured the number of tests that they ran, like in a month. Like that was the thing. We knew if they shot 8 shots, they were gonna make one, and it was gonna go good. They shot 4 or 3 shots, like they're gambling now. One of them might work, but they need to be shooting more. And so what we taught them, their team, the leading indicator there was like, how many quality tests are you running? Like we're going to measure you to that. And I care more about that than I do the conversion lift, because I know the conversion lift will be there. That's the lagging indicator. I know it'll be there if you are running the right number of quality tests. Like, and if for whatever reason, like it ends up failing and, the client fires us and it's a terrible disaster, that's fine. That happens. But what I care about is that my team ran the 8 quality tests to get there.
Right. It's not about the product, it's about the byproduct, like how the process to get there. So you're measuring.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, counting calories and exercise minutes. The scale's going to come. And if it doesn't, then we'll adjust our leading indicators and our targets there. But I always try to keep my team focused on what do I do today that will result in that outcome that I want later. And I try to focus and measure people on those leading indicators as much as possible.
Right. Cool. So, lagging and leading indicator, very interesting idea. But yeah, for the audience that wants to know about like the Amazon PPC, like how we measure it, like we normally measure it like both way as well. Like if we translate into lagging and leading indicator, again, the outcome is always like about like optimizing the ad for the client. So we measure them by the income, the Amazon distributing, how much that they're distributing to their client. So that is the measure for the lagging indicator. But of course, like we measure people, we measure like our PPC manager, whether or not they are setting up the whole strategy, how many strategy they have executed for one account, for one client that we have. So that is the kind of like leading indicator that we have there. But yeah, today's show is about the cancer. So I just don't want you guys to leave you guys hanging because I was the one who started that, right? But yeah, Deacon. So how about a final question? Like, what do you think? Say when we scale as a team, like to manage them well, to make sure that they're, especially right now, everyone's doing remote, right? So SOP is important, right? Can you tell our audience what is the best way to manage SOP workflows, processes to make sure that everything is in line together?
Yeah. So this actually starts with, culture and hiring, believe it or not. And this is similar to, this is so true in so many different areas. Like if you want an e-commerce business that has explosive growth, it's probably more about product selection and, the market you're in than it is some specific PPC tactic or whatever, right? If you want an agency that's going to grow and be super well recognized, I always tell people like that's actually a big part of that is client selection. You need those flagship clients. And then it's the same thing with a team that's like running super well. You got to have the right team members on the bus. And if we're zooming out to like company level, this is a remote company. I need people that are going to follow the SOPs. I need to know what's going on as a leader. Like I'm not there to see over their shoulder if there's a problem. So I need like a certain type of person on the team. And this kind of comes down to a concept that I teach everybody that I work with when they're hiring, which is skills versus talents. Skills are things that you learn. Talents are things that you're born with. It's like who you are. It's innate. And what's interesting is that because you can learn skills, those are things that you can develop. Like somebody could teach me how to do PPC and eventually I would learn it and it would be great. And now I have a new skill. The talent though is like, are you comfortable analyzing numbers in a spreadsheet and like doing math in your head and making decisions like that? Like that's more of a talent. And I say that because, and what's interesting about talents rather is that talents are kind of like, because you're born with them, like you shouldn't bring people onto the team that are missing important talents. Like one of the most important things I used to hire for with media buyers was that they loved spreadsheets. And I had kind of a clever way of determining that without them knowing what I was looking for. But at the end of the day, one of the only things I was looking for was, did you take numbers, put them in a spreadsheet and calculate some numbers I didn't give you? Like that's the talent that I needed. In a remote team and with management, one of those things that you need is like these people communicate clearly, written text, videos like Loom or whatever. Like that's just who they are. I don't have to, when they send something, like they send a complete message. This is really important if you're working with people, for example, who are overseas. A lot of my team at the agency, we were spread across 14 different countries and a lot of different time zones. And so it was really important that when I hired people, one of their talents was I'm such a clear communicator that when you wake up in the UK and you open your message, the message is complete enough that you can act on it, even though I haven't started my day yet. And so this is why I say like a lot of it is like skill versus talent. It's like when I'm hiring people, I want people that like to check in on Slack, that are going to, even if no one else is in the channel, they're going to talk to the channel and say, here's what I did today. And now we have a record of that for other people. And so I think in remote teams in particular, it's almost like one of the things you hire for. And the same thing with SOPs. Like I hear this all the time, like, people won't use the SOPs. That comes down to a couple things. If staying on the skills versus talents things, like I put that right in the hiring process, which is like the hiring process should be almost like they should be following a little mini SOP during the process. And you'll very quickly find out, like, did they put the right stuff in the subject line? Did they reply properly? Was the video the right length? Like, are they doing this? Like I gave them instructions. Did they follow them? That is, believe it or not, a talent. There are people who follow instructions, like my 12-year-old who will build every Lego piece exactly perfect. And then I've got my 7-year-old who is like, sets the instructions aside and he's like building stuff. Like that's just who they are. And so you want to hire your team if it's a role that's very like detail oriented, like PPC, and you have a playbook. You want to start from the very beginning of like, these people, like they follow playbooks, like they did it in the whole interview process. Like that's what you want. And then kind of the less important part of that, believe it or not, is actually the SOP itself. So usually people think if they're not following them, the tendency is like, oh, well, it needs to be more useful. So I'll add more information, which I think is a big mistake. There's a quote that I always love where somebody, I can't remember where this was. This is a leader in the tech field, which is a little bit of my background. So if you want to foolproof your SOPs, you're going to wind up with a bunch of fools working for you.
Exactly.
which is I think really important to think about anytime I am going into an SOP thinking this just needs more, more screenshots, more like arrows pointing at exactly where to click.
Yeah.
Stuff like that is not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is usually that they don't understand the process. They don't understand why the process is important.
Yeah.
Or they're just not the person who follows processes. And that's, that happens, but it's not going to change is what the point I want to get across. Like they don't suddenly wake up one day and go, oh, I'm going to follow instructions letter for letter today. Like that part doesn't change.
Yeah, I agree. Like SOP is more of like translating a concept. Like if you're hiring someone else to like have to do that every bit like to be perfect, the thing is like you're hiring the wrong person if you are doing a complicated role that you're hiring at. The SOP that we use normally is just the last part, which is the checklist. Make sure that things is being put it back in the right place where they put that. But then the whole concept part is more of like a reference educational content only, right? So yeah, good say, Deacon. I like the idea of that SOP then that you're talking about here. Well, it's been like half an hour. It's been like 40 minutes already. I mean, I'm like I think we have to wrap the episode here. So Deacon, would you like to let us know like where we can find you?
Yeah, deaconbradley.com is the best place to find me. You can find, links to other things that I'm doing and working on there. Newsletter. I love to write and share this stuff as I work with a lot of brands. And so I'm always kind of sharing the stories behind the scenes of those through the lens that we were talking about today. Like, hey, clients experiencing this. Here's what we did. Here's what happened. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll make sure that I'll put it under the episode show notes. I think that wraps up another insightful episode. I think we can do another one because there's a lot of role that we can explore, different role, right?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we'll make a part 2 in the future for sure. I would like to just like thank you for showing up today, like showing us your expertise, and I hope you guys enjoy it from Deacon's experience on hiring and setting KPI. It's truly a pleasure having you, Deacon, on the show.
Thank you for having me.